Hi everybody, good morning. This is Jean here, Tuesday morning. We all know what day it is. I'm going to be going to the dentist a little bit later, but I wanted to take my mind off of it, and I thought I want to come in my sewing room. I haven't sewed for a few days. This is not part 2 of my flying geese tutorial. Remember, I was making my flying geese parts, my flying geese blocks. I'm just doing something in the interim, just to take up some time because I sort of screwed up. If you remember my flying geese blocks, I had purchased a bunch of very inexpensive 50% off 10-inch squares to make my blocks. And remember I said I'm going to do the sashing next? I'm thinking I don't have the sashing material. So what I did is I went on eBay to buy the Riley Blake fabric that I think coordinates, a darker gray, for my sashing and my border. It hasn't come yet, so I can't do that part 2. So when my fabric comes, I'll be doing part 2. But today, what I thought I'd do is I'm just gonna show you how I make a pillowcase. And it's not quilting, but it's not rocket science. It's really, really fun to make. Now, you can go on YouTube and if you type in make a pillowcase, you come up with, there's these methods. They're called sausage pillowcase making, burrito, and you'll see why, the way it's a tube and the way it's made. I've made a million of them. Fun, fun, fun. Only takes a little bit of fabric and you're done in like 3 seams. And no raw seams. It's all French seams. A French seam is a seam that's sewn like funky, like on the wrong sides together, but then you turn it and you put right sides together and that seam is enclosed. No raw edges on this pillowcase. However, I've made a million of these. This is my pretty pillowcase that I just made. You'll be making a million of them when you discover, you probably have, but if you haven't ever done it, so you could make one. But as you know, my husband's from England, and I lived in England forever. And English and European pillow cases, or what they call pillow slips, pillow covers or something, for bed pillows, have this inner flap here. Okay, there's a flap there that actually covers your pillow. So in America, we just have a pillowcase that just you shove your pillow in, right? And you see the pillow. Well, in England and in Europe, they have this real pretty flap that covers your pillow. So I'm thinking, how the heck did you get that flap in there? So I went on YouTube, and there's a real pretty lady. There's a million tutorials for pillowcases, but not one with a flap. Well, no, actually, there's one. This lady she's real pretty. She has white hair. She's not old. Oh heaven, I don't know who she is. She's pretty, like prematurely white hair. And she explains how to make. She's not English, but she explains how to make a pillowcase. And I was watching her tutorial, and I'm thinking, it's sort of complicated. And it ends up with raw seams that you just like zigzag. But I'm thinking, I don't want to do that. Ain't nobody got time for that. So I tried to figure out this morning, and I figured it out. And it's okay. There's no raw seams. It's French seams. There has this flap. So if you want to follow along with me, that's what I'm going to be doing. Now this is 100% cotton that I've pulled from my stash. I have not washed this fabric. I've not pre-washed it, because the measurements I give you, this is just a standard pillow. It's a little bit big, which I don't mind. So when I wash this, it's going to shrink. Probably it's going to shrink about 3%, 3 to 4%, the cotton, which is absolutely fine. Then I'll come and I'll press it real nice. I'll wash it, press it real nice, and then put my pillow on it. So this is slightly big, or not. Maybe you won't think it's big, but this is a standard size, American size standard pillow. So I'm going to be making, I'm going to be giving you the measurements for that. But I can also give you the measurements for a king size, I think. So anyway, what you want to do is, this is the body of the fabric. There's a little white edging, which actually does nothing. Oh, why is it? It looks pretty, I guess. Yeah, that's pretty. And then there's this cuff on the end. And then on the inside, can you see? There's this flap, which is the same fabric as the cuff. So let me show you. So what I've done is I have the 3 fabrics. What you want to buy is, or have, is 27 inches. Selvage to selvage, just off the bolt, 27 inches of the body of the fabric. What is that? 27 inches. 27 inches is what? Not half. 27 inches is 27 inches. So figure that, what, that's like 3/4 of a yard, or a little bit more or less. 27 inches of fabric you need for that. Then for the cuff, the pretty white useless cuff there, no, the pretty white useless band, but it's pretty, you want 3 inches of your little contrasting fabric. This is white. 3 inches cut, fold to selvage. Then for your cuff, your pretty gray part there, you want, again, right off the bolt, 9 inches. Okay, 9 inches, right, cut off the bolt. So 9 inches. And then for your inner flap, I really messed about with this. it sort of works. It's good. You want a piece the same as your cuff, and it's 10 inches by 22 inches. Now, this is the flap that goes inside, and I was doing this sort of on the principle of the my envelope closure style pillows that you shove, your cushion inside of it. So I just messed about, and I came about with this. So you could make this a little bit bigger, and actually, looking at it, I might have made it. It covers it. It covers it, and I finished this edge. And there's my pillow inside, and this flap covers it. I might have made that just slightly bigger, maybe 12 inches. But I was experimenting, and this is what I came up with. This is fine. But you might want to make this even 12 inches if you want a deeper flap. So you have your 4 pieces of fabric, and then a king size pillow. It's constructed the same exact way, but obviously you want this bigger, right? So that piece for a king size pillow, you would want 36 inches, which is a yard of fabric. So with a yard of fabric and a few bits, you can make a king size pillowcase with this inner flap, if you're English, or if you really care. So anyway, I'll show you what I'm going to do first to make this. So here I am at my sewing machine. And I have, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this 10 piece by 22 inch piece of fabric, and I'm going to be making a small rolled hem. Now how you might want to do this, if you really don't think you can do it the way I do, is what we're going to try to achieve is this little tiny finished off hem here. Okay? Can you see that? But so what you might want to do is you might want to go over to your ironing board and about 1/4 of an inch in, iron it the whole way down. And then you want to go back to your ironing board and then perhaps turn that in another 1/4 of an inch and iron it again. I don't do that because I can do it, and so can you. What you do is you just turn it that way. I'm trying to get my hand out of the way, and you turn it that way, and you just start stitching this hem close to the edge, or close to the folded edge, and you have a little hem there. This is going to be your inner flap that has your finished edge. You just keep rolling it just onto itself, and you have this finished edge. You roll it a couple times. You're just making a hem on this piece of fabric here. So this is what I have. This hemmed, one long 22-inch piece of hemmed fabric. Now I'm going to go over and I'm going to press that real well, and then I'll show you how we're going to construct this pillowcase. So I've actually sewn that hem on this 10-inch piece, and I've pressed it real well. And also what I've done is I've taken this 9-inch cuff piece over to my ironing board. Very, very important that you iron it in half real carefully, edge to edge, raw edge to raw edge, and make a nice creased, pressed fold on that fold edge. And I've also done the same with my white binding, my white pretty piece. I folded this 3-inch piece in half and pressed it real well. Now what you want to do, this doesn't make a lot of sense it seems, but it's going to work. What you're going to do is you're going to take your 9-inch piece and you're going to open it up. You have your nice pressed edge there. You want to take your flap fabric, line it up with the edges here. Hopefully you can see this, and you're going to be stitching along that it's about 1/4 inch. You're going to be stitching this raw edge. This is right side to right side. You want to stitch from this point on right down that crease. And if you want to just be about 1/4 inch proud of that crease, because that's your seam allowance. So you just figure out where the crease is. Just go along, figure out where the crease is, and pin it at 1/4 inch, keeping that raw edge along there. And then you stitch, just raw edge. You're just going to stitch along there. So I'm going to go do that now. So I've sewn along this edge right there, and you're going to have this contraption here, this flap. You just want to sort of finger press it. Just pull it along like that with the seam, the raw edge like that, and just leave that for now, okay? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take our white piece of trim, our 3-inch folded piece, and you're going to line up one edge, and you're going to just start putting that at the top very carefully, at the top, matching that up at the very top edge of this border piece. Then you're going to be taking your body of your fabric, and you're going to be taking the selvage edge to selvage edge. You're going to be taking the selvage edge. Now you're going to line up, again, you're going to line up one end very, very carefully. And you're going to be putting, one end is going to be perfect, the other end is going to be messed up. You're going to be putting that right at the top edge. See, this fabric frays a lot. That's why it needs to have French seams. So I'm going to pin this along here and do a little, maybe a bit bigger than 1/4 inch. Just going to pin that whole. You're going to have the gray, you're going to have the white, and then you're going to have the pink. And you're just going to line those raw edges up, and you're going to stitch that seam from end to end. Don't worry about what the ends look like. You just want to stitch that seam, making sure that's real nice and matched up. This is where, I don't usually pin, as you know, but this is where you want to pin, pin, pin. And you see that end? That's all messed up. It's amazing. You would think there would be an industry standard for the width of fabric. There's not. So don't worry about these. These are the selvage edges of all this fabric, but we have one end that is completely straight like that. And so I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch this seam. So I've just gone over to the ironing board and I've stitched my top seam to enclose that little white and the gray and this flappy thing right now. Now this is a time, you'll see my one side is quite, all the selvages are nice and neat. The other side, these pieces are bigger. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to, my rotary cutter. I'm just gonna slice this off. This will get tucked in a seam anyway. So I just slice that off, those excess bits. And so I've sewn this top seam together, and you have this here. this contraption. You have your border, you have your pink, and you have this flap thing here. What you want to do now is you want to turn it over, smooth it all out, and you have this here, okay? With that seam, everything's smoothed down. You'll see the wrong side of the fabric. So now what you want to do is you want to pick up this pink fabric, your body fabric, and you want, this is where the sausage, where the burrito comes into play. You want to start folding this piece of fabric. And then you see your little flap here. You want to treat that as the same. You're just going to start rolling that up along the length of your fabric. And then what's going to appear is the border. Okay? The border is right side up. So you just want to roll this piece there until you get about there. You can't go anymore because that's stitched down. It's all smoothed out. Make sure everything is smooth. And now, again, make sure you have your pins at the ready. You're going to take this border piece here and very carefully evening it all up. You're going to take this and you're going to fold it onto this seam. And then we're going to sew. You're not want to be catching this fold here. That's very important. That's where the sausage comes in. So you just want to fold this bit up here, end to end, edge to raw edge, and then you can feel that you're not going to catch that. And then this again is where you're going to start pinning this all the way along. You've already sewn that one seam. You're going to sew right along there again. Raw edge to raw edge, the whole length of this sausage, of this tube, of this burrito. So you're going to pin it and making sure when you sew it, you don't catch this piece in here. Now your edges should pretty much match up because we trim this edge. Even if it's a bit wonky, don't worry because we're going to sort out the sides of this pillowcase in a few minutes. But this is your second seam. So I'm going to just go along, being careful not to touch that, and sew that seam. So I've come back from my sewing machine and I've stitched that seam right along there. Now, this is what you want to do. You want to start pulling out from this tube. You want to start pulling out this fabric here. And hopefully it will be right and I won't have messed up. So you just want to start pulling it from the inside out. And you'll be seeing what this is making. So just pull it, pull it, pull it, pull it, pull it. And there you go. We have this, looks like a pillowcase. All right, with this flap here. Now we're going to address that flap. So you want to go over and you want to iron this thing, this contraption here. Now this is where, so I'll just finger press it for now because I've ironed it pretty good. So there you have your pillowcase looking thing with this flap on it. Now this is where our French seams come into play, okay? What we want to do is we want to turn this flap inside. Now see, there's my flap. There is a seam at the top, which is fine. You want to make sure that it's all nice and pressed, like that. Now, what you want to do is this is right, the wrong sides you want to put. This is a raw edge here, and this is a raw edge here, but we're going to be making a French seam. So what we're going to do, and there's one extra step to get rid of this raw seam here, but it's okay. What we're going to do, Now I'll do it like I did it before. It's one extra step, but because this is a raw seam, I'll show you. What we're going to do is with the wrong sides together. So there's our pillowcase, making sure that our edges are together. You want to make sure very, very carefully that this flap is tucked right into that as it was a seam. Now I'm just using the fold of the fabric. You see that? I'm just using the fold, and I find it very helpful to just use that fold of that fabric as it's going to be my seam. Now, what I am going to do is I want to clear up this edge because I'm going to be sewing here, and you're going, this is how you create a French seam. You're going, well, this is all raw, this is the right side of the fabric, this is the pillowcase. How in the world are you going to make a nice seam? So what I want to do is I have my cuff, I have my inside flap all tucked underneath. It's all tucked underneath there. Make sure it's all tucked underneath. And then I want to get rid of just some of this width. So I just bring this up, and I put it on my board. This is the fold over here. This piece is the fold, excuse me. You can take your rotary cutter. You just want a nice clean edge. So I just take about a quarter inch, maybe a little bit bigger than a quarter inch. This is a bit junky up here. If you can see up here, hopefully you can see it. I'm just going to take my rotary cutter, having squared this up, and I want this edge real nice and clean for my French seam, and you'll see. So it's a lot of fabric here. Even my handy dandy cutter. Yeah, you see, that is a lot of fabric. And the lady, so I'll cut that here. The lady who was making this said, you can't make a French seam because there's a lot of fabric and it'll be a big lump. Well, I got that when I was messing about trying to get this seam. There is quite a bit of fabric here. You have your two things, you have your little binding, you have your seam, but that's okay, that's all right. Because you can sew it. So I've done that. I've squared it up as it were, and there's my lovely seam that I'm going to be sewing. Now to make a French seam, because I've just done that, I'm just going to pin it. It's very very careful because I've sewn it so precisely. These edges of this binding here match up perfectly. So I just want to stitch that. It's very important that you have the edges up here together. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sewing this about a quarter of an inch all the way around. See, there's a selvage. Yeah, that's about a quarter of an inch. But I'm going to clip that, that's fine. So I want to be sewing this about a quarter of an inch all the way around my pillow. Now, even on the fold, it's very important that you say, well, why do you have to do it to the fold? It's very important because I have to enclose this inner flap, which you've tucked, you've smoothed, and you have that flap, again, about a quarter of an inch all the way up to the end here. So that's what I'm going to be doing now. I'm going to go and sew this seam together. So here I have just sewn the right sides together of my pillowcase. It looks like a pillowcase, right? Looks like a pillowcase with a flap in it. But I want to create my French seam. So what I've done is I've very carefully done about a quarter of an inch along the whole edge, pivoting at the end. And actually, because there's a little bit of a selvage, I just want to clip that just slightly, because selvages, as you know, are woven slightly tighter. And that's fine that that's there. That's going to be hidden inside the seam. And now I've released those stitches. That's absolutely fine. So now I have my lovely pillowcase, but how do I make my lovely seams? So they're French seams. So I turn it inside out. And at this point, I'm going to stop. At this point, I'm going to stop the video because I'm going to go to my ironing board, but I want to show you what we have. We have this hunky-dory thing here. Remember, we have this turned in edge, this raw edge, right? But what we want to do to create the French seam is we want to just slightly turn that under and then pin so that bit gets caught in your seam. You got that? A French seam is we're going to iron this at the ironing board. I'm going to take this over to the ironing board and make a nice real crease along that seam that I've sewn, okay? But we have this little raw edge thing. So I'm just turning that under, that raw edge. This is a bit bootleg, but this is how I come out with not one single raw seam. So I have that little bit of a turning. You have to mess about. And so then, when you sew this along, when you sew this seam, and again, there's a little bit of a lump here, but that's okay. You're going to be sewing along this seam here, and that means you're enclosing that outer seam, right? You're enclosing that. So you just want to enclose that seam. You want to take it over to your ironing board and really, really, really pull out this seam so that when you stitch, maybe it's even 1/2 inch. You want to not have any raw edges, raw fibers of the other seam from the inside. You're sewing basically right sides together and you're creating a seam, but look, there's no raw edges. This is what is called a French seam. And this flappy piece, which I've invented, which isn't, I mean, I'm nattering on, but you see that, like, we have a lovely Frenched seam flapped pillowcase. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going over to my ironing board. I'm going to iron that really, really good. I'm going to pull out my corners, and then you'll be able to really finger press and iron that, so when you go to sew that seam, this inner seam, this finished seam, we're done now, you're not going to have any frayed edges on the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over my ironing board now, and then so I think my camera switched off, but here I am. My battery went off. Here I am. I've actually stitched this around. My pillowcase is finished, and as you can see, hopefully, I've turned that raw edge of that seam of the flap right into the seam, okay? And that should be, yep, that should be, that's all tucked in. There's not one raw edge on this pillowcase. I've done about 1/2 inch along here, so I'm sure to enclose that other raw seam we've made all the way around my pillowcase, being very careful to match these edges. And what I've done, just as if you see my tutorial on my envelope style pillowcase, is when I came along this bit with my inner flap, I actually stitched and stitched and stitched it. So when you're pulling your pillow over that flap, remember, it doesn't rip. I'm all about reinforcing your seams. And then at the very end here, I backstitched and backstitched and backstitched and backstitched. So that seam is not going to come out on both sides. Nicely backstitched. Now here comes the miracle of this pillowcase. As you've seen, I've just been nattering on, but this morning I've pull my points out, my corner at the bottom, pull my corners out, push my corners out. There's not one, oh, well, there's a few little frays, but they're just a few little bits. I can just cut them off because actually this fabric frayed a little bit. It's okay. But it's just a little bit of fraying on that. You might have that. You don't have to go back and re-stitch it. You can just cut those little bits off. There's just literally maybe 1 or 2 bits of fray I have on the bottom there. That's where my fabric was fraying. But my side piece, perfect. It's perfect. You see that? And then on my band, here's my pillowcase. It's finished. Now what I want to do is I want to go back and I want to press this real well. I want to iron that really nice and down. Now that pretty lovely white-haired lady, she said French seams would make it too bulky. And I suppose like that is slightly a little bit of a bulk, but that Oh, it doesn't bother me. I don't know, maybe it bothers her. It doesn't bother me in the least. But what does maybe bother me just very, very slightly, just at the very top of this pillowcase with this French seam, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, and I hate hand sewing, but I'm going to actually hand stitch this. It is a little bit of a bulk seam. I'm just going to hand stitch that right down to make it just almost one with the backing. And then yeah, just that bit of a end seam is not proud. You don't have to. Why am I going to do that? Maybe I'm not. But like maybe you would want to do that. Just take a little bit of a whip stitch around that edge. And anyway, there's your pillowcase. So you want to press it, you want to wash it, and then look, we have a pillowcase, French seamed. Look at that, with an inner flap. They said it couldn't be done. Well, I did it. Anyway, there's my morning. There's my pillowcase. I have a set of matching pillowcases now. Go wash them, shrink them a little bit, and then iron them really nice. You know me, press, press, press. Put my lovely pillow in it, my fresh pillow, and I have a beautiful French seamed pillowcase that's already done. So there you go. So I'm going to go have a cup of tea and contemplate my afternoon at the dentist. And I will get back to you with the other part 2 of my tutorial. Anyway, thanks folks for joining me. I appreciate it. Have a good one. Bye.